Spring has officially unsprung. Hi, welcome, come on in. My name is Aoife and today I am wrapping up all of the books that I put on my spring TBR. I'm not going to say that I have read all of them, but I am going to tell you about my thoughts about the ones that I did read. As I said, I didn't read all of the 6 books that I put on this list at the start of February. The one that I did not get to is Come and Get It by Kylie Reid. I had a really great time with Such a Fun Age. I really enjoyed that book, but I just never found myself reaching for Come and Get It over the last 3 months. I don't know if it was because I didn't have time. I don't know if it was because I couldn't find the book somewhere. I really wanted to read it as an audiobook. I really wanted to access it that way. It just never ended up working out. It's definitely a book that I'm going to go back to, and it's definitely a book that I'm going to put on my sites in the future. It just didn't end up working out for me this time. There was also a book on the list that I started and I did not finish, and that book was Spring by Ali Smith. It's the 3rd in the seasonal quartet, and I was reading this with my friend Shannon from 155 Books and Amelia from Amelia Barlow Books. I think by the time we got to Spring, I was the only one who was continuing on with the series. Neither of the other two were particularly enamored by the series, and I think Shannon had already said by winter that it wasn't a series she was looking forward to picking back up. The completionist in me really wanted to see it through right to the end, so I said that I would give Spring a try, and it also did not work for me. I remember listening to the audiobook and I drifted off for a little bit. I think I was concentrating on something at work, and when I came back to it, I felt like I had absolutely no idea what was going on. But I also felt like I didn't want to go back about 2 or so hours and figure out what it was that I had been missing. There are a couple of books that I will go back and that I will listen back again, or I will read back a couple of pages previously, but this time I just didn't want to find out. It also felt like there was way too much happening and way too much that was trying to be crammed into the pages. So unfortunately, this one was the weakest of the series for me so far, and it was a pretty bad DNF. The first book that I actually did finish across spring was Battle Royale by Lucy Parker. This is not Battle Royale, the one that is loosely connected with the Hunger Games. Instead, this is a baking romance. It is following Sylvie and Dominic. 4 years ago, Sylvie was one of the finalists on Operation Cake, but an incident with the toppling cake had her kicked out of the competition right when she was in touch of the finish line. Dominic is one of the judges on Operation Cake, and he is well known for being very broody, very moody, very mysterious, and he's not exactly a fan favourite because of how grumpy he can be. Fast forward to a couple of years later, and Sylvie runs her own bakery, which is a huge success, and it has a beautiful kind of garden or forest theme to it, and Dominic is still working as one of the judges in Operation Cake. However, his counterpart judge has just left the show, their contract has ended, and now they're looking for somebody else to come in and to fill their shoes. Sylvie seems like the perfect person to come in and replace them. However, Dominic and Sylvie are going to be brought together in another way. Princess Rose is about to get married to Johnny, a commoner, and Dominic and Sylvie are in a battle with one another to win the contract for their wedding cake. Here's one of the things that I think I would change if I was writing this book myself. Instead of having them competing for the contract, I would actually have them have to work together. It would be the perfect enemies to lovers workplace romance that I think I really wanted this book to be. But I just didn't really get that vibe from it. I felt like they were sparring each other a little bit too much for me to enjoy the book or to want to see this romance going anywhere or flourishing. I think I just needed to see them actually get along with each other a little bit more. While I love seeing the footage of Operation Cake, I also feel like I would have liked to see it a little bit more. I felt like it was really well interspersed with what was happening in the story, but I also feel like I would have loved to see them behind the scenes on the show a little bit more, or having to actually work with one another. That was the kind of book that I had signed up for, so I think I just wanted to see that a little bit more. But something that I wanted to see a little bit less of is how many characters there were in this book and how many subplots and how many things were going on at one time. It felt like there were too many balls being juggled and too much in the air for me to even focus on one thing. Not only was there Johnny and Rose's wedding, there was something happening with Johnny's uncle for quite a lot of the book. Sylvie and Dominic had to try and figure out what the main ingredients or what the main taste and flavour profile of the cake was so that they could try and recreate it for themselves. It was based on a cocktail that the groom had basically made up in a drunken stupor one night, and now they had to try and work basically backwards from zero to put everything together. Then there was a lot of stuff with Dominic's sister Petunia, who I believe is getting her own book, the second book in this series. I'm not entirely sure if I'm going to read it because I felt like this one was a little bit too chaotic for me. Then there was everything with Operation Cake. Then there was everything with Sylvie and the bakery that she had by herself, and the feelings that one of her co-workers had for her and how she was going to react to that. And then there was Sylvie and Dominic's relationship itself. It just felt like it was too much happening all at one time. I think it just needed to get rid of two separate plot points, or merge them together, or work them around a little bit differently, just so that this book would be a little bit more cohesive. Overall, this book was pretty okay. I did have a good time while I was reading it, despite the fact that I don't think it was the book that I had sold myself for, and that there were a couple of things that I would change, but I don't think it's a series I'm going to be continuing on with. Also on the list was Spirit Level by Richie Craven. This was Richie's debut novel, and I was so hooked on it just because of who the author was. Richie is the writer of one of Irish Twitter's biggest stories. I think it was from Christmas 2020, when everything was shut down. Some people weren't able to go back home for Christmas. Some people were spending it in a completely different way than they had ever experienced Christmas before. Richie's story of working in Marks and Spencer's and the pre-Christmas rush to get his entire family's dinner sorted out, basically at the 11th hour, will live on in Irish Twitter long after that hell site is gone. This book is following Danny, who is 24 years old, and he's a little bit directionless in life at the moment. His job isn't going super well. He feels like his family have kind of put his sister, who's just had a baby, a little bit ahead of him at the moment, and he's not particularly happy with his love life either. One of his best friends, Nicola, has just come back from a year travelling around South America. Before Nicola took off, however, Danny and Nicola spent the night together, but now she has come back with a brand new South American boyfriend in tow. One evening, Danny and his friend Nudge go to Nicola's welcome back party. They have a couple of drinks, they get to know her new boyfriend, and towards the end of the night, Danny just feels like he wants to head home. Nudge decides that he's going to bring his best friend back home, which might not have been the best decision he could have made. Nudge and Danny are both more than a couple of pints deep by this stage, but Nudge manages to force Danny into the car, and they are in an accident where Nudge crashes into one of the canals in Dublin City. Unfortunately, Nudge loses his life in the car accident, but Danny is still alive, and you could say that he's suffering a little bit from survivor's guilt. He is able to see Nudge's ghost, but when he is slightly tipsy. So Danny spends most of this book in a slightly drunken state, trying to find out why Nudge is still here, what is going on, if there's any unfinished business that he has to go through, or if there's something that he needs to do before he can go to the other side, and basically trying to go around Dublin to find anybody who can help them. Something that I really loved about this book is that it is a really realistic portrayal of men's mental health. It's something that I don't feel is shown a lot in books or in any other type of media, and it is absolutely not something that needs to be swept under the carpet. So I'm really glad that this book shone a light on it. It also is incredibly and inherently Irish, but without being overly so. One of Danny and Nudge's friends, for example, is called Sven. His real name is Stephen, S-T-E-V-E-N, but when his name had been misspelled on the school registry, everyone decided that is now your name. This is something that is so common in Ireland, and particularly in Irish schools, that there were certain people in my class who had a nickname that most of the time I would have actually forgotten what their real name was. There are a couple of people in my locality, or there are a couple of people that I know from growing up, that I only ever know them by this nickname, and I don't actually know for certain what their real name is. As you can imagine, for a story with a man who can see dead people, this book has got a slight touch of a magical realism to it, and I thought that that was woven in really well with the rest of the storyline. Towards the second half of the book, Danny and Nudge actually meet somebody who can help them. They've been to a couple of other pretty dodgy mediums or psychics who are almost convinced that they can help him, until they meet with a woman named Adele. Adele actually is able to see Nudge, but it is Lucy who is much more helpful to the two boys than you can think that she would be. The action of this book really ramps up in the last third or so, and that is when the book really started to grip me in. I was having a great time with it up until then anyway, but it was the last third or so that really had me gripped into it. I think this is such a great debut novel. At times, it doesn't even read like a debut novel. It flows really well. The story is told in such a great way, and it is incredibly gripping. I think this book would translate pretty well outside of Ireland as well. While I did say that it is inherently Irish, it does also have quite an international feel to it. And I would really love it if people outside of Ireland started to realise how great this book is. Then I read one of my most anticipated books of 2023, and that was Aisling Ever After by Sarah Breen and Emer McLysaght. This is the final book in the Aisling series, so with this, I also ticked off one of my series intentions for 2024. This book follows Aisling, who, as we left her at the end of the fourth book, is living in New York and is really making a new name for herself. She's gotten a brand new job. She is basically making a new life for herself in a new country, which is, from experience, not a simple thing to do. She's coming to terms with new cultures. She's coming to terms with new ways of living. But her ex-boyfriend has just turned up on her front doorstep. Something that I did question is how in the hell did he actually figure out what her address was without other people knowing that they were still in contact or that they were still talking to one another? But suspend your belief a little bit. Aisling and John decide they're going to give their relationship another try, and that soured the book for me already from about 30 or 40 pages in. I felt like Aisling had made so much progress and had come so far in her life that to get back with a guy who I didn't feel was very good for her and that they wanted different things, it felt like a massive step backwards for her. Unfortunately, they did stay together for the entire rest of the book, and the question of them getting married and having children and moving back home was always on the cards. And I felt like, again, Aisling had gone through so much and had changed so much as a person that was just bringing her back to where she was at the start of the books without having any of this growth period that she had gone through. A phrase that I would use to describe this book is tying everything up perfectly with a bow, even if it's not perfect. There were so many situations in this book that it felt like within a couple of pages, they were all sorted out completely, wrapped up in a bow, so that everybody had a happy ending by the end of this book. Sive, one of Aisling's best friends, is in a relationship with Don, who is the frontman of one of the bands that is in this book. Sive and Dom are forever at loggerheads with one another, but one of the big things that they cannot agree on is whether or not they want to have children. In the real world, this is one of the biggest fundamental incompatibilities that couples will face. You can't compromise, you can't have half a child to keep one person happy, and you can't not have a child to keep the other person happy too. For most couples, if you can't agree on whether or not you want to have children, that generally is the funeral toll for your relationship. They do separate for like a week or so, and then they realize, oh, I don't need to have children to be happy as long as I have you. And I don't think that that's a very realistic portrayal. I feel like for a lot of people, having children is such an ingrained want in them that if they meet a partner who is not going to go along with what they've wanted for their entire lives, it's not something that they're just going to give up on a whim. I felt as well that Aisling's reaction to this was a little bit juvenile in that she kept saying, oh, he's going to realise that he can't live without you. He's going to realise that he's head over heels in love with you. And you can be head over heels in love with somebody and you can not want to live without them, but also have some fundamental things that are not going to make a relationship viable for you. Speaking of immaturity, there were a couple of other instances where you can see that 31-year-old Aisling, so roughly the same age as I am, is just a little bit green to the world. When her friends tell her about sexting her long-distance boyfriend, she acts as if this is something that has just been introduced to the world yesterday. She has absolutely no idea how she would go about it, what kind of pictures she would take, what kind of things she would send to him. And as soon as she has finished sending messages to her boyfriend, she's almost wiping her phone's history completely clean, as if to say, if somebody finds out that I'm doing this, I'm never going to live it down, or I'm never going to be accepted back into society. Whereas I feel like the world has come on a little bit further than that now. There were also a couple of minor things that I didn't like about this book. For example, saying that the time difference between Dublin and New York was 7 hours when that's the flight time. The time difference between Dublin and New York is actually 5 hours. But as I said, that was just a minor qualm. It is important to know when you're going into this book that it does have quite a big trigger warning for a miscarriage pregnancy. 2 of the characters in here are pregnant at the same time, and one of the pregnancies goes to full term, whereas the other one they lose the baby about 12 or so weeks, just around the time that they would be starting to tell people. Quite a lot of these books are written with topics that are personal to Sarah and Emer in mind, and this is of no difference to the rest of the books. It is written with so much respect and it is written with so much tact. You can tell just how much love went into the pages as they were writing this book, and you can also tell that it is a kind of a memorial to a life that was so loved that they never got to meet. Overall, I don't think this was the goodbye that I wanted Aisling to have. There were a couple of things in this book that really just didn't work for me, such as Aisling's kind of juvenile response to her mother's new relationship. Her mother had been a widow for about 2 or 3 years by the time that she started to see someone new, and Aisling was really like a 14-year-old who had been scorned by her mother when she finds out this news. Combining everything in together, it just wasn't the end to the series that I had hoped it would be. Finally, I read In the Weeds by B.K. Barson, and if you're looking for a small town romance that's going to get you into the summer mood, this is definitely it. This book follows Beckett and Evelyn, who we will have met in the first book in the series, Love Light Farms. Beckett works on the farm that Stella has owned in the first book, and Evelyn is the social media influencer who has come to Inglewood in the first book, Love Light Farms, to judge the farm and to have it enter into a social media competition. It turns out that Beckett and Evelyn had met each other at a conference a couple of months ago, spent a couple of nights together, had a fantastic time with one another, and then parted ways, never expecting to hear from one another again. Beckett, however, has not been able to take Evelyn out of his mind ever since he met her, and since returning home from Inglewood after Christmas, Evelyn has noticed that she can't remember the last time she was happy, but she's pretty sure that it was when she was in Inglewood. So, while her life is in a little bit of a funk, she heads back to the small town and tries to basically reignite her happy spirit that is seeming to go missing at the moment. While she is there, she and Beckett get a little bit better acquainted because it turns out that she's going to be staying at his house for a couple of weeks. As she's here, she learns that Beckett is a cat dad. He has got 4 adorable kittens, each with the names of Santa's reindeer. And he keeps mysteriously disappearing every single morning for a couple of hours and then disappearing at night for a couple of hours. She's pretty sure that he is seeing somebody else or that there's somebody else on the scene, but what it turns out to be is a group of adorable ducklings that he has found abandoned on a lake and that he is nursing back to health. As you can imagine, Beckett is pretty much a big cinnamon roll of a character, but he is also a pretty grumpy one. This is a really great grumpy sunshine romance, but it is also a second chance romance. That kind of threw me for a loop because this didn't feel like a second chance romance to me. It felt like they had basically just met for like a couple of hours and known each other then, and that now they were really starting to ignite the feelings between the two of them. It felt much, much more like they were starting from afresh. And I think that that's particularly because we hadn't really seen a whole lot of them together. There was just a really short prologue, or it was so long ago and it was for such a small space of time that it didn't feel like this was a second chance romance that I don't necessarily tend to go for. And if you love a small town vibe in your books, you are definitely going to like this one because it is overspilling with the small town vibes, particularly in the fact that when Evelyn arrives into town, she learns about the town telephone. This is how everyone in the town finds out their gossip about everyone else, what they're doing, what they're saying, what they're eating, where they're going. And this is so rife in small towns. It's something that I know from being a small town girlie myself. If something happens to you, your neighbours know about it within maximum a couple of hours. That is something that Evelyn finds out the hard way. She arrives in Inglewood, and a couple of days later, she changes her phone number. Within a couple of days, Evelyn's new phone number has been added to the town telephone, and she finds out things that she didn't even know that she was doing herself from her inclusion in this telephone. I felt like that was maybe a little bit too intrusive, and I don't think it's something that I would have loved to have read, but I see why it was done. As I said, Beckett is quite a grumpy character, but somewhere you don't see the grump coming through is when he's interacting with his 3 sisters. Beckett is the eldest of them, and they have such a really nice relationship with one another, particularly when they all start taking part in pub quizzes. I am a huge pub quiz fan. I absolutely love shows like Pointless or The Chase or Tipping Point or like Jeopardy if you're over in the States. I absolutely love those kind of daytime quiz TV shows. And if there is a pub quiz in my locality and I'm free, I will be there. So watching these characters all take part in this random pub quiz that they had been signed up to, I absolutely loved that part. I didn't know it was something that I wanted to see represented in a book until I saw it represented in the book. As I said, this is the second book in the Inglewood series. The third book in the series, Mixed Signals, is already out, and the fourth book, Business Casual, is coming out at the end of June in this year, and it is following Charlie, who is Stella from the first book's stepbrother. I love a book that is interconnected in some way. I love a book that is all set in the one town, or that features the same characters in minor roles in this book, but is a major character in this one. So it is definitely a series that I am going to be continuing on with, because I have had such a great time with the 2 books from it I've read so far. Those were all of the books that I put on my spring TBR this year, and that is how I did with my attempts to read any of them. Have you read any of the books that are on this spring TBR, or what was the best book that you read in the last 3 months? If you would love to leave me a comment but you can't think of anything you'd like to say, then just leave me the tulips emoji. Don't forget to like and subscribe, because I have new videos up every week. Now, get on out of here.